Thank you, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to today's presentation offered to you by the British Remain Chamber of Commerce. I'm Neil McGregor, the chairman of the chamber. I'm very pleased to welcome this morning our guest speaker, Katalin Juju from London Stock Exchange Group. Now, for those of you who haven't used this system before, there is a message box in the center where I'm about to paste in the web address of the page of the Chamber's website describing today's seminar and the background of our speaker. So please have a look at that. That means I can get on and introduce him and let him start talking to you, who's much more interesting than I am. One question I think we will have at the end from me is it a question of sustainability or a question of resilience in the current time? But perhaps that'll be covered in the course of the discussion. If you have any questions, please type them into that chat box you'll just have seen. And Katalin will deal with those as he sees fit, probably at the end of the webinar. We are recording this on Zoom. It will be available later on the Chamber's channels and web page. So please bear that in mind. Right, Katalin, thank you very much for speaking to us this morning. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, everyone, for joining. It's quite exciting to see so many people interested in the topic of sustainability. I think the current period and 2020 as a whole so far has shown us that we need to adopt new ways of thinking, not just about we are not prepared for the risks that the 2020s are about to bring. And today's presentation will focus precisely on this from a sustainability standpoint, where I will also introduce ESG as not just an element from finance. You've probably been hearing this word a lot in recent years, but as a way of thinking and designing your business approach. So before we get into the thick of it, and to give me a better idea on how to guide today's presentation, can some of you tell me what sustainability means for you and why you decided to attend this webinar? One or two people would be great.
Hello, Katalin. Hello, everybody. So if I may add to this in terms of what sustainability means for myself is really ensuring that we build a prosperous future for everybody. So it's not just for our current generation, but obviously it's for the generations to come. And that is increasingly important in the light of the environmental destruction that we have, but also the unsustainable practices across the world in business, but also in industry as well. So I'm working with companies on sustainability, helping them along the journey. And this is the key driver for me and why I'm attending this webinar.
Excellent, Corina, thank you. So you're a very value and purpose driven sustainability leader. That's great to hear. Anyone else?
Hi, Katalin. In very easy terms, for me, sustainability is taking care of our resources and not consuming them and looking to the future.
Okay, thank you, Laura, for that. So it's great that from what you've told me so far, you've identified precisely the elements that we will tackle today. So the structure of the presentation is as follows. We will be discussing a bit about the history of ESG and sustainability as a whole. Then we will talk about what sustainability means for business in general. We will briefly touch upon the international frameworks and regulations that exist in this field. And then finally, we will talk about what your business can do to better prepare itself for the future. So if you have any punctual examples from your business to discuss at the end, I think that that would be great. So starting with the beginning, what is ESG? Well, environmental, social, and governance are a set of criteria for a company's operations that socially and environmentally conscious investors use to screen potential investments. So environmental criteria consider how a company protects nature and reduce its impact on the environment. Social criteria looks at how a company manages relationships with employees, customers, suppliers, as well as the overall communities where they operate. And governance, or more specifically corporate governance, deals with a company's inner workings. So that means the structure of the board of directors, the executive pay design, audits, internal controls, and of course, shareholder rights. So why is ESG important, you might ask? As we can see by just looking around us, we are facing unprecedented acceleration of technological innovation, human migration, as well as climate change, which is increasingly marked by extreme weather patterns. As such, it's important for organizations, businesses, and governments alike to consider ESG criteria to ensure sustainability for future generations, as well as increase resilience and ensure future prospects for themselves. Obviously, business can have a big impact on nature and the society we live in, and of course can influence it positively by taking small steps such as reducing waste, giving back to the communities they operate in, as well as enhancing internal corporate governance practices. So as we've established so far, ESG criteria are an increasingly popular way for investors to evaluate companies which they want to invest in. From a company point of view, obviously, this is a huge opportunity in the market. If you enhance your sustainability, or better said, your ESG practices, you will become more attractive to investors and funding. If you are a smaller private company, for example, recent legislation, or that legislation which will enter into force, will actually require you to focus on ESG initiatives, in the sense that access to funding will not be as easy if, as a company, you cannot prove that you also invest in sustainable activities. Also, for example, the value of global assets applying ESG criteria to drive investment decisions has increased tremendously in recent years. It tripled to almost, I think, $50 trillion in 2020. So over the past 8 years, the sum invested actually tripled. Also, many mutual funds, brokerage firms, and even robo-advisors now offer ESG products that employ ESG criteria. And there are also large players in finance that drive this paradigm shift, such as BlackRock and Goldman Sachs, who've announced that future investment decisions will be based strictly on ESG criteria. So I think that we can conclude that in addition to being a good corporate citizen, public pressure and increased regulation also require businesses to do their part in achieving the overarching goals set by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and as well as the targets as set out by the Paris Agreement. So looking at what has happened so far during the pandemic. Well, I think that until now, the COVID pandemic has shown us that corporations and governments alike are quite unprepared to deal with crisis. So many businesses have closed down, as we see also in Romania, also abroad, which have actually sent millions of people into unemployment, increasing the income gap, and of course, increasing poverty. I think that we can comfortably say that while those who are rich lost a little, those who had little to begin with actually have lost a lot. We see examples of large industries such as air travel and Horeca, which have pretty much grinded to a halt, and which resulted in losses numbered in the billions. I believe that one of the main red flags that the pandemic has raised relates to how brittle our supply chains are and how easily they can be interrupted, and why not even broken by a crisis. Supply chain is a big part of this, and we'll touch upon this more later today. So from an economic perspective, the companies that I've just mentioned have become unsustainable, however you look at it. They became unable to continue their operations, unable to pay employees, and also unable to give back to the communities they operate in. However, the pandemic, I believe, is just the tip of the iceberg, and the biggest underlying problem actually, which affects us and which is already affecting us in direct but also indirect ways, is climate change, whose effects we've been noticing more and more over the past decades. So then I believe that the question becomes, okay, we have this huge threat that is facing us. Can we do something about it? And if we can, what can we do? I believe that for the most part, the answer is yes, and that's what we'll talk about today. However, I believe that in order to get a good understanding of how we got here, it's really important to also understand a bit our history. So I think you've already seen the first slide with ESG, where I gave some examples of what constitutes environmental, social, and governance criteria. Now, as I said, let's look a bit at the history and start with the beginning. So if we look at the Industrial Revolution, right, which began a bit over 250 years ago, since then the world has underwent tremendous change, both from economic and technological perspective, which have changed the structure of business and politics and society, making it unrecognizable. So just think about it, that a farmer in, I don't know, the 1800s could have probably never imagined the world that we're living in today. However, these significant developments, along with an increased population, meant that people could be healthier and also be productive for longer. Also, one of the effects of capitalism and globalization has actually supported the transition from a supply-driven to a demand-driven economy. We all know that currently, using the economic theory that our system was designed on, the neoclassical theory supported by Friedman, gross domestic product, right? So GDP has been used as the primary indicator of growth. So as such, GDP is seen as the major indicator of a nation's well-being and prosperity. Why not? In this logic, it means that continued and consistent, and why not, if it's possible, exponential economic growth would be the panacea for human prosperity. However, I think we've seen a lot in recent years that our current economic model is rather unstable, as the economic crises of the last century have shown us, poor at actually distributing the benefits of growth, because we see wealth concentration occur more and more, even though GDP is rising overall. And of course, incapable of managing the environment on which we all depend. Essentially, it became unsustainable, and the question now is if GDP is an actual indicator of human prosperity and well-being. To this end, even the World Economic Forum states, and I quote, that GDP is no longer an accurate measure of economic progress. So although the industrial revolutions paved the way for industrialization, economic growth, and the numerous innovations in health and well-being that we are experiencing today, it's obvious that this rapid development has come at a significant price. And I will take a few moments to also talk about a period of time known as the Great Acceleration. So just take a moment to think about the resources we would need in order to sustain growth in a business as usual model right now on a global scale. Right, so as individual wealth increases for us, the desire to purchase more and more and more also increases. This has become even more apparent over the last 50 to 70 years, and has resulted in significant deterioration of the natural resources that we have actually been using to fuel this growth and development. This period of rapid progress as well as deterioration has been termed the Great Acceleration, and there have been several studies conducted on this topic. One of the studies that I'm focusing on, the results of it you also have on the screen right now, considered 24 great acceleration indicators, which have been measured from 1750 and up until 2010. So these indicators, as you can see, are split into two categories: socioeconomic trends and Earth system trends. If you look at them, these indicators actually reveal a very close correlation between our economic development and changes at the Earth system level, especially from the 1950s onwards, which is irrefutable proof that human-induced development is a big contributor to the current changes in the Earth systems. So if you look at the slide, you can see, for example, that marine fish capture or shrimp aquaculture were basically non-existent until 1950, after which it skyrocketed. It boggles the mind, at least from my perspective, how this kind of growth can actually be sustained infinitely as the current economic model actually dictates. So this period of great acceleration has obviously resulted in significant pressure on the Earth's natural resources in a very, very short period of time. So, for example, resources like coal deposits, which have taken millions of years to form, have started depleting significantly since the Industrial Revolution. And we are using resources much faster than they can be replenished. Annually, we're using the resources equivalent of, I believe, 1.7 Earths. And this will only continue if business as usual is maintained. Some other examples of system pressures and trends that the world is currently undergoing are obviously increased prosperity and population growth, urbanization, Energy demand, as I've just said. So for example, we are still using about 65% of global energy is still derived from fossil fuels. The biggest consumer of these fossil fuels actually being China, which accounts for about a quarter of coal consumption. However, an interesting aspect here, and we'll touch upon this later if we have time, China is also aiming to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060, which I think is a great development. Another system pressure that I think is highly relevant and will be highly relevant in the future is our food security, because we will need to be able to feed about 10 billion people by 2050, and as well as water scarcity. So the way we are currently using water in our homes, in farming, and in industry will most likely, also corroborated with climate change, will probably lead to water scarcity in the parts of the world which need it most. So now that we've established a little bit the history of why we need sustainability and ESG, let's also talk a bit about where sustainability and business come together. So with all of this happening around us, I think that businesses are increasingly becoming aware of the risks that sustainability challenges pose to their operations, as well as the opportunities created by addressing these risks. And I think one of the main opportunities relates to long-term resilience. These challenges are, of course, multifaceted, and they bring together most dimensions of the environment we operate in. So they bring in together economic elements, social elements, technological, and of course, environmental considerations. So not only do these challenges impact the current operating context for business, but they also require, I believe, a radical rethink of traditional business and our operating models. In this sense, I believe that innovation becomes crucial as decision-making based on prior experience becomes less reliable, just because we are facing challenges and as well as opportunities that we have not faced before. So, like I said, there are plenty of opportunities in addressing these challenges, and some of them are, for example, the increased interconnectedness between business and society. This is also where the concept of shared value becomes important. So we are starting to see a shift, or we should expect to see it more and more, where businesses are identifying social problems and trying to solve them as business opportunities. There is also increased corporate surveillance. So with the advent of technology, internet, and communication, companies are more and more under scrutiny for what they're doing, also by regulators, but as society as a whole. There is also an opportunity to reduce costs. So for example, identifying and creating new revenue streams for existing business. One example that comes to mind and many people don't know about is that Google, for example, also produces and sells green energy. Okay, so I mentioned some of the opportunities that exist in today's environment. I think that companies must also look to adapt their value creation plans in this new business landscape, and also try to optimize their performance against future key environmental, social, and governance issues in order to actually safeguard their operations and ensure long-term success. I think it's highly relevant that in order to not just survive but thrive in the 2020s and beyond, businesses will need to actually understand the forces that shape the next decade and to recognize these opportunities to their advantage. So building a resilient business is not just about looking at a bottom line and at our direct dependencies, such as our creditors and our customers, but it's increasingly dependent on business preparing for the impact of non-financial risks. So as the risks from ESG issues, right, such as climate change, water scarcity, waste management, and why not even the talent retention and health and safety are becoming more and more apparent, and investor attention and why not even public attention is drawn more and more to how companies address these ESG issues. So obviously the risk landscape is constantly changing on both local and regional levels. But of course, given the dimension of today's business and globalization, these risks are also increasingly global. So while these risks have the potential to negatively impact business regardless of location, some countries are more prone to risks than others. So obviously, for example, businesses in dry regions face a higher risks of being affected by potential water shortages due to climate change. Then today's sustainability leader and the company who is future prepared and forward looking would ask themselves, can I take the risk of having, I don't know, production operations in such an area of the world? Can I do something about it? Can I change it? Can I change locations? Can I shorten my supply chains? I think this is also a good opportunity after going through this part of the presentation for everyone to put it in their back of their mind and think about, given the specifics of my business or the company that I work in, what kind of risks are most material to me along my value chain. So like I said earlier, along with these risks that are becoming more and more apparent, the changing landscape also brings together many commercial opportunities for business. And by means of national legislation and why not even international agreements, initiatives, businesses are also beginning to get incentivized to actually take advantage of these opportunities. Of course, taking advantage of the opportunities needs to be assessed against the limits to economic growth that I've mentioned previously, and take into account the limited resources that our growth is actually reliant on. So one of these major opportunities, as I've mentioned earlier, is increased resilience. So resilience is also increasingly being used as an overarching term to explain a sustainably designed system, which I totally agree with. We're starting to see more and more and getting global acknowledgement of the risks that climate change actually pose to the global economy. So according to the United Nations, for example, not addressing these climate-related issues could cost companies about $1.2 trillion over the next 15 years. Just think about what we can achieve if we use that money today in order to improve our processes and our operations. So as an example of one of these opportunities, I will go back to what I mentioned earlier about supply chains, which are a major, an important aspect of ensuring business sustainability. One short example would be that if you have production operations in China, for example, or rely on goods produced in China. I'll give you an example of a friend of mine who has a bike business and imports different parts from China. His business virtually went grinded to a halt from January to about May of this year, just because of the COVID pandemic. So he faced losses in the tens of thousands of euros, and of course had to lay off some of the people that work for his company. Could he have done something about it? Probably. What could he have done? Yeah, I don't have the answer, but I think shortening the supply chain could have been one of them. Keeping a reserve stock could have been another solution. Yeah, but we'll get we'll discuss potential answers to these problems in the last part of today's session. So like I said, opportunities. Opportunity in terms of understanding your supply chain resilience. Well, many businesses' vulnerabilities actually arise from their supply chains. So it's important to understand the interconnectedness and the interconnected factors along your supply chain. Some of the questions that you have to ask yourself in order to prepare for such a risk would be, is your material supplier resilient? Do they work in an area prone to natural disaster? Did I conduct my due diligence properly? Are my supplier's values consistent with mine? And so on. Also, how politically stable the region is could be another key factor in determining the long-term viability of your operations and conducting business with a third party. One well-known example, I think, that changed the face of supply chains that comes to mind is the disaster at Rana Plaza in Bangladesh in 2013, where a factory roof collapsed and it killed a bit over 1,000 workers. And this put increased significant, like huge pressure on supply chains of major fashion brands. I mean, even today, this disaster is considered a watershed moment in addressing factory working conditions. And we've understood from that disaster that companies that find themselves negatively associated with such events, obviously risk becoming targets for protesters, boycotts, and of course losing business partners. While those which manage to build, and not only build but maintain reputation, actually build brand loyalty and assure themselves business for the future. Another major opportunity besides building supply chain resilience, and I think this one is the most relevant for all of you, is of course improved financial performance. So there is an increased amount of evidence, especially coming from the finance field in which I work in, that businesses which are being recognized and sustainable consistently outperform their peers. So if we look over the S&P 500 or whatever major indices you would like to consider over the past 30 years, those companies which have garnered higher sustainability scores on whatever grounds measured, whether it be ESG or another methodology, have consistently outperformed their peers, which did not focus or did not actually attempt to invest on the non-financial aspects of their business. So we are starting to see, when considering the risk and the opportunity landscape, as well as the global context in which we're all operating in, that actually an imperative for sustainability is actually taking shape. So by addressing these risks and seizing new commercial opportunities, conducting business in a sustainable way has the potential to benefit your bottom line as well as build long-term resilience. However, as we've discussed and established so far in our discussion, the future bottom line is not just about the profits, but it's the triple bottom line that brings together all three elements that we need to pay attention to: people, planet, and profit. So, for example, another advantage of getting on the sustainability boat would be competitive advantage, right? So companies which invest in the circular economy, which incorporates sustainable designs in or circular designs in their operations, in their product design or process design, create potential value for themselves by creating a quote unquote first mover advantage. So basically you are positioning yourselves as a leader in the market when the trend is just beginning to rise, while in the future you can also move the capital that's become available to areas of growth with less risk. So in order to achieve this, obviously we need to also embrace new concepts of value creation. So like I said earlier, a company cannot achieve long-term profits without embracing, firstly, purpose, and considering the needs of a broad range of stakeholders. So this is about looking across your value chain, as I mentioned earlier. There is an increasing shift away from focus on shareholder value creation and investor needs in favor of the recognition of interdependence between the value of a business generates for itself, as well as the well-being and overall advantages that it creates for the society that it operates in. So this is about creating shared value, and it's not just it's not about CSR or donating money once a year. It's about having consistent support to areas which you consider most material to your company or which you would like to focus on. So basically the purpose of this shared value is for companies to find ways to turn social problems into business opportunities that actually help solve these problems instead. It's about creating value for both your business and the forms of profits, obviously, as well as society through job creation, environmental actions, and so on. So, like I said before, it's not just about doing the right thing and donating money to causes. Creating shared value is also a management strategy which aims to empower individuals and the communities where the company operates in, while at the same time delivering on and creating financial value for the business. So when creating a sustainably designed product or a process, I think that some of the aims that you as a corporation, as a sustainability leader must keep in mind are the following. Efficiency, right? So how can I achieve more or the same with less resources? And here efficiency also encompasses different aspects such as durability, which implies preventing or reducing obsolescence, longevity, so increasing the lifespan of the product, And why not even dematerialization? So using less or no material in order to deliver the same functionality. One well-known example of dematerialization would be the company Unilever, which I believe all of you have heard of or used their products, which actually has a great program in which they are redesigning their products to use less substances, which is a great initiative. It saves on money, it saves on resources. Okay. Also, if you're thinking about the short-term costs associated with shifting your business to a more sustainable model, I leave you with this thought in mind. Well, in 2006, the Stern Review came out, which established that fighting global warming now would cost approximately 1% of global GDP, while non-action could potentially lead to a loss of more than 20% of GDP in the long term. So this is about you as a business measuring what is of value to you. Short-term profit or long-term resilience. We might reach a point where this no longer becomes a choice, and laws and regulations will require you to act. My advice and the way I look at it would be to actually start taking action now. Moving on, I've said I will also, we're reaching the last 15 minutes of today's presentation. As always, I've talked, I talk way more than I plan to, but I promise I'll go quick through this part. So there are a broad range of international frameworks and regulations that deal with sustainability. The most important of them being the Sustainable Development Goals, which I think were a significant development for the world at large when you consider that over 190 nations across the world have said yes to taking up these 17 goals and doing their best, which is debatable, in order to pursue them. So you might know the UN Sustainable Development Goals are a set of 17 goals, which are underpinned by some, I think, over 160 specific targets that countries are supposed to achieve by 2030. Other important pieces of regulation that came out would be the Paris Agreement, which aims at keeping global temperatures under 1.5 degrees Celsius, which I think will be quite a challenge. And for this to take place, some hard decisions will need to be taken by governments. And speaking of governments, we also need to consider what a government's duties are. So business usually looks to government and says, okay, provide me with the regulation. What is the framework? What are the laws in which I can operate? What are the limits to what I can do and what I can't do? Well, beyond that, I think that some of the ways that governments should perform its duties are by facilitating transparent and constructive debate. Something similar to what we're doing now. We know from our local example that government doesn't necessarily have the best experts in whatever fields they might wish to legiferate in. So reaching out to business would be a great alternative to that. Another challenge that governments face would be the challenge in addressing the responsible management of the shared resource system. Where obviously the self-interests of or actions, right, of an individual or organization can actually be in direct conflict with the interest of a larger group or even society as a whole. And this is what we commonly known as the tragedy of the commons. So to give you a concrete example with regards to climate change, so one country's or company's investments to minimize greenhouse gas emissions may have a positive global effect. But these benefits are all shared equally with countries or companies that do not minimize their GHG emissions. Another example that comes to mind would be, I don't know, over exploitation of fishing stocks, right? So quotas are set on fishing because they're important in order to ensure the sustainability and replenishment of fishing stocks, and as such, it's in all our interest, our global interest, for these quotas to maintain. However, if I am a fishing company or I own a trawler, my particular interest would be to fish every last fish that I can. So there has to be a balance struck within these competing interests, and that's why it's called the tragedy of the commons. So although we can see that we know that government doesn't really control all the ways that new policy is developed, I think it's important that they play a key supportive role to various government institutions, civil society, as well as the private sector. I am a strong believer that through government's collaborative decisions and actions, policy can actually be implemented to develop and sustain an environment of certainty, right? Which would give businesses that, I don't know, that peace of mind, that investing in sustainable approaches, sustainable products and operations is not just cost effective, but provides future resilience and prospects. Of course, one of the major challenges here that I personally see when it comes to governments taking more action is actually the short-term, the number of years that politicians actually hold office for. So when you have a minister or a president holding office for 4 years, it's quite difficult for this person to take a decision or to implement legislation whose effects you would only see in 10, 15, and 20 years, when their most direct interest would be short term, which means re-election after 4 years. So I believe this is one of the main challenges that we're facing, at least from the legislative and government side of things. This reluctance to take more coercive and decisive action. I think this is also highlighted by the current government's response on the COVID pandemic. I, for one, think that more stringent decisions should have been taken earlier. But of course, from a political standpoint, I also understand the need to keep people's mind at rest and have them come out to vote in December. I do not necessarily have an answer for this and what would be the best way to approach it, but it's just something to think about. And as we are running out of time, in this slide, I also wanted to show you a bit about what the current EU Green Deal looks like. So the EU Green Deal is a package of legislation that is coming into force into the European Union. I think it's an excellent package. Of course, implementation will take a bit of effort on the part of its member states. However, I wanted to share this with you, this exact image, in order to highlight how much the focus will be on circularity, the circular economy, preserving and restoring ecosystems and biodiversity, and how everything is aimed at becoming, let's call it quote unquote green. So as I see Raul, as he commented here in the chat box, that sustainability is a buzzword. Yes, it can be a buzzword, and I support him completely that it should be understood as common sense. But apparently, governments, businesses, and people need to be educated more and more on this topic. Lastly, I'm leaving you with this image of different approaches that can actually be used. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So this image that actually shows some of the methods that can be used to operationalize a sustainability strategy. There are plenty of systems, and some of them you might already know, such as life cycle assessment, water risk assessment, or occupational health and safety management systems. Since we are reaching the end of today's presentation, what I would like all of you to take away are these three words: environmental, social, and governance. I think that it's important, again, and I'm reinforcing this, to understand that business is no longer just about the profit, is about looking beyond that and recognizing that we have a broad range of stakeholders, not just our shareholders, not just our clients. Always ask a question. If I want to do this with my business, how will it impact the environment? Does it have a positive impact? If not, what can I do for it to have a positive impact? From a social perspective, is it good for my employees? Is it not good for my employees? How can I influence the society, the city, the town, the village that I operate in? How can I ensure long-term sustainability for that? And then from a governance perspective, do I have the proper internal mechanisms in order to address risks and issues? Do I have a business continuity plan? Do I conduct regular audits of the risks that I'm exposed to? And so on. We could probably go on and talk about this for several days, but unfortunately we only had 1 hour for today. So I think we can pretty much conclude this presentation, and we can move on to questions. And I saw that Raul raised his hand.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Morning, Raul. Hi.
Hi. Thank you, Kathleen, for this very comprehensive presentation. This is always a good thing to go over all the basics and to see all the implications of, let's call it, the new paradigm.
Yeah.
I would also like to draw some attention more explicitly on something that you have mentioned just, en passant. And I think it is important for all of us to realize that this is no longer a single-sided fight. It's no longer just something that the companies have to do for their own, let's say, safety in the future. And the fact that you put into the discussion the European Green Deal just emphasizes even more the importance of governments and companies working together, which has to come both from the government side, I apologize, both from the government side, but also from the company side. I'm talking specifically about Romania. I'm not sure if this is the case in the rest of the European countries. Here we do have a major lack of communication, a major lack of opportunities to sit together around the same round table and talk about, for example, large infrastructure projects from all these ESG perspectives, not only from the investitional perspectives and separate individual goals, either of the political factor and the government or the private companies. European Green Deal, besides being a strong platform towards climate neutrality and all other climate objectives along the way, it also advocates a lot and extremely firm on the multi-stakeholder discussions and multi-stakeholder decisions. And especially when we're talking about big companies which move together with the ocean, once a government changes direction or once the government takes the decision to influence some of the economical sectors, the companies need to be there from the very outset of that new discussion. And this is something that I would like to encourage all of our colleagues in the companies, as well as all of our colleagues in the government, to think about it and to find their counterparts and start working together in ESG related projects at least. They would, I'm sorry, it's not a question. It's more like an expression of a need that I start to see more and more in Romania, especially since the discussions on the European Green Deal. But now we have it even more stringent, if you want, in the discussions about the National Resilience Plan, which is just about to be issued for Romania, and which will spend 30 billion euros in the next 3 years, involving private companies, which are not at the table right now. That is important. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for that, Raul. I totally back that up. For me, I mean, looking beyond the operational side of things and what needs to be done either by business or governments, but it's about what the individual, what you as a person can do. And I think this is the biggest challenge about changing people's way of thinking, rather from short-term rewards, adopting a long-termistic point of view. And I don't necessarily have an answer to that. I think that the answer is somewhere in the middle, on the side of what government and business can both do. But I also tend to think that if we are to truly be successful in achieving the goals as set out by the Paris Agreement, for example, or even achieving part of the Sustainable Development Goals, some hard choices will need to be taken by governments, and some of them will not be as comfortable for the population. And here I'm just thinking especially relating to consumption, right? Because we are consuming like crazy goods and services, and we've moved away from actually buying and using things that we need to just buying and using things just for the heck of it. Yeah, but that's another that's another discussion that we can extend for another couple of hours. Are there any other questions?
Perhaps I can ask one, Kathleen. I'd say well done. You've held your audience exceptionally well. Congratulations on a
Thank you.
good presentation. There are a number of companies in businesses which are changing. One thinks here of what we used to call oil and gas companies that are now becoming energy companies. And one can think also perhaps of companies in the tobacco sector, where we're seeing their core of activity under pressure from social or legal factors. Have you any thoughts upon these kind of companies and how they might need to change their fundamental business?
Yes, well, oil and gas companies, or let's call them energy companies, as you've put it, I think they are actually the major investors in renewables and have gone on the boat since the beginning. Firstly, because they realize that they cannot stay in business by continuing with the current model, but they also had the added advantage of being large companies with significant amounts of capital, who could basically afford a radical redesign and shift of their core business. With regards to your example of tobacco companies and tobacco products, so I can give you an example from my work at the London Stock Exchange. So when we are building a sustainability index, one of the main exclusions of companies that under no circumstances will get into one of those indexes are tobacco producing companies. But if we're looking at them, tobacco producing companies are no longer producing as much tobacco, or at least not advertising it because they're not allowed to, but they're advertising their vaping products. Is vaping smoking? Do we have a definition for it? I don't know yet, but I think this is one opportunity that they've identified to ensure resilience for themselves. Now, I am by no means a doctor and can give a verdict on whether vaping is more healthy than traditional smoking. But from an operational and resilience standpoint, we can say that the tobacco companies and the oil and gas ones are doing what they can to survive. My hope is that their decisions and the redesign of their operations will also have a positive impact on the 3 E, S, and G aspects of society as a whole.
Yes, I think probably the best example to think of, I think, is Nokia, which I believe was known as a paper producer.
Right.
Before it began to get into mobile telephony. I can see that are there any other questions we have at the moment, please, from anybody? It would appear not. I think you've held your audience exceptionally well. I think they're all going to want to read through your slides in a little more detail and think further.
Sure.
Slides?
I really hope that everybody enjoyed today's session. Obviously, the topic is quite comprehensive, and there are different areas also, as Raul said, where we could have gotten into a lot of detail, but I chose to maintain it quite high level to give people an overall understanding. And of course, if there is future interest to pursue this topic, maybe we can organize other more intensive or specific webinars as well.
That would be very much appreciated. Thank you again to you. Unless there are any other questions, I'll wind this up to say thank you, Katalin. Thank you to LSEG for your support for the Chamber, and in particular for this morning's very interesting presentation. I should say also thank you to Madalina, Stefan, and Anna, my colleagues in the Chamber. Anna, when's our next event, please?
Thank you, Neil. Thank you again, Katalin, for the very informative session today. And as I said at the beginning, this was our first webinar on this topic, but definitely not our last one. So, of course, next year we are planning to have another one, maybe in more depth one. But meanwhile, we have prepared some very interesting webinars on different topics. For example, next week, we're going to have a webinar on doing business in Romania. Together with some of our members, Enviso and Kyer Group, and one representative from the British Embassy in Bucharest. And in 2 weeks' time, we're going to have a webinar on workforce transformation together with our colleagues from the German Chamber of Commerce in Romania. Of course, if you want to check our upcoming events, you can check our website. I just typed in the link for it. And of course, our social media channels are daily updated, so you can take the information from there as well. Thank you again, everyone, for attending this morning session with us. Please stay safe, and hopefully we will see each other again on our upcoming webinar. Thank you again very much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Katalin.
Stay sustainable.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.